This podcast was made possible by our members on armchairhistory.tv. Use code ARMCHAIRCHATS for 60% off of your first month. Mr. Flop Flop 2 asks what my favorite historical movies are. That's our first question. This is a difficult one because I think when I was younger, I enjoyed movies just if they were historical alone or war movies, and that would be enough to make me like them. Nowadays, I feel like I don't watch those movies as much. I mean, especially because when you're younger, I'm living with my parents. Me and my dad would both watch more war movies. Now, when it's me and my wife, it's like if she wants to have me watch a dance competition or like something like that, and I want to watch a war film, those things don't line up necessarily. So we have to compromise a little bit more. But I also just don't really like a lot of like war and history movies just by virtue of them being historical. So it's harder for me to pick those movies that I like. So it's a surprisingly difficult question. I would say if I had to pick some stuff that I do like, I enjoyed Inglourious Bastards, which is not by virtue of it being historical, but just because I think it's a nice Quentin Tarantino movie. It's not historical at all, really. Saving Private Ryan's like a classic, but that movie to me seems so cliche that I don't have much to say on it. I think it is just well made, and for its time, it was kind of showing that gritty side of war. I do feel like I watched some other films like Patton. I know if you grew up with this movie, you're going to hate me for saying this, but I tried watching films like Patton as a person who did not grow up watching a film like that, and I could not sit through it. I thought if you've ever seen the movie, you'll know too, instead of like German tanks, I think they use like Cold War American tanks and just repaint them beige or something. So I don't know. I'm not one for nitpicking equipment and everything, but that one just seems more of like a war film for the sake of being a war film, and I don't really connect with those as much. Otherwise, I watched Fury recently, which I have a lot to say about that. I don't know if that would ruin this podcast episode if I just ranted about movies that I don't like. So maybe the next person should ask, what are some historical movies you don't like? And maybe if you guys want, I can rant about that. But I'll end it with a pro and a con, I guess, or like a good movie and a bad movie, and just we can kind of end that question there. I'll use Fury as my bad movie example. Some parts of that film were cool, by the way. I do like the inside shots of the tank. It looks very real, like you're actually inside the tank. If you've seen that film, it's all based on being in an American Sherman vehicle. When I first saw it, when it first came out and I was younger, I just thought it was kind of a cool tank film, but I really did not like the ending. I only realized when I went back to watch it recently that the ending is like 40 minutes long, which is very surprising. In my memory, I remember it just being an annoying like 15-minute sequence and just a really bad ending. I won't spoil anything, but the movie ends with this big climactic battle. And by battle, I mean one tank fighting against an entire German army. Or more realistically, probably like, I don't know if you'd say that's company-sized if we're actually talking about real troop sizes. Every platoon is about 3 squads of 30 men. I would say that's a company. They fought against. I won't say who won, who lost, who I don't know what decisions people make or anything like that. But yeah, they fight against a German mechanized company and as one tank, and it is a very bad ending. I really do not like it. That is like the glorification of war type of stuff. I don't need every movie to be like lecturing me on the morality of war. Sometimes it is cool just to see some really nice looking World War II planes or tanks in action, and that enough is cool sometimes. But yeah, the ending of that film, if you haven't seen it yet, just the ending is insanely bad. I feel like that is overshadowed. One thing I will spoil, I guess, it's not really a spoiler, but there's a Tiger tank battle scene, which a Tiger tank fights 4 Shermans, takes out all 3 Shermans, which is fine, but the way it does it, it's like the Tiger tank is charging across open ground, and they're all fighting at point-blank range, which I think a lot of historical films miss the idea that, and it's difficult to do, honestly, but engagement ranges are very long, and a lot of movies try to make it seem like people are just fighting close quarters with everything, and that's fine, it's believable to some extent, because infantry can fight in close quarters, but when you have tanks fighting in close quarters, and that's every engagement, that it breaks a lot of the realism for me. And a Tiger tank charging and the battle coming down to the last 2 tanks circling around each other like sharks at point blank, especially with the, again, I'm not a guy who knows every specification about tanks, but that's an Easy 8 Sherman. Its gun is powerful enough to disable or destroy a Tiger at long range. And of course, the Tiger can take out a regular Sherman or an Easy 8 at long range as well. I don't know how the fight ended up coming down to a close quarters fight. Maybe it would make more sense if you had like two heavily armored tanks with very weak guns fighting against each other. I don't know what matchup that would be. I don't know if you had like a Churchill versus a Tiger, I guess, or something like that, but that seems unfeasible in the context of the way the movie showed it. But yeah, that scene definitely rubbed me the wrong way, but that overshadows just how bad the ending is. I honestly would take the Tiger tank battle scene over the ending, which is, to me, just horrifically bad. Even the way they end it, again, I don't want to spoil anything. I don't like when people just randomly spoil movies, even if they're older. I don't think Fury's that old, but I don't want to, if you want to watch the film, I want you to watch it with fresh eyes if you haven't seen it. But no, the ending's bad. It's worth watching because of how bad that is. Otherwise, yeah, it's a gritty war film, and there's some things I appreciate, but that's about it. The last thing I'll say in terms of just like a historical movie I really liked, let me try to think of one. Oh gosh, I don't know. Is there anything from Kubrick that I like? Because I remember watching Doctor Strangelove, which you could, again, this is the thing, like Doctor Strangelove, I guess, is kind of historical, and but that's not the purpose of the movie, right? Like the purpose of the movie is like comedy, like, and political, I guess, like political comedy and satire, and it just so happens to be historical. That's my preferred type of historical film, when something about the characters of the story is the most important part, and it just so happens to be set in history. I don't like when films say, well, it's historical. We don't really have good characters or good story, but just watch it because it's history. Films like I can list a bunch of films I don't like, but movies, especially by Mel Gibson, his war movies, which as a kid I liked, but I just can't watch those now because there's no purpose to them. There's nothing. When you watch The Patriot or when you watch Braveheart or even Hacksaw Ridge, especially, that movie's just like blowing things up for the sake of blowing things up. And I don't know, Hacksaw Ridge maybe is more forgiving because it's about a medic trying to save people, so at least there's some kind of spin on it. But the way they portray war is comical in some ways. Like it's almost trying to make it comical. There's a scene in Hacksaw Ridge, if you haven't seen that film, it's set in the Pacific in World War II. There's a scene where they are just scaling this mountain and they are creeping up and they're walking up to a Japanese position and they don't know what to expect. This is their first time in combat, and they find a wounded U.S. soldier. Maybe he's dead. And one guy reaches down to go like touch his shoulder. And then the U.S. soldier comes back to life, or he's not dead, springs up, screams in the soldier's face who like touched him with like a horrifying close-up scream, like a jump scare. And then a bullet comes in, shoots through the back of his head, comes out through the front of his head into the guy who woke him up, and blood splatters all over the guy's face, and the battle starts. And that is like, I get that there are horrific things in war, and there are things that are bloody and gory, and there are those things that happen. But the way they do that scene was like a mixture of comedic and also like horror in like I don't know, like I would expect to see that in a gore horror film. And then the way they did it was with comedic timing, and to me that entire thing rubbed me the wrong way. I will say a positive thing. We Were Soldiers, which is a Mel Gibson film, he directed that one as well, and he stars in it. I don't know if he directed it, but he stars in that one. In terms of something gory or horrific that doesn't come across as just trying to jump scare you or be comedic, when they napalmed their own lines, which is based on a true story, and one of the soldiers, a U.S. soldier catches on fire and you see his skin burnt off, and that guy's screaming and in pain, and that whole scene does not come across comedic. It is that is like a horror film, or sorry, a horror scene, but it doesn't have the like jump, it's not jump scaring you. It's horrible because of the circumstance, not because it's trying to make it a horror scene like they did in Hacksaw Ridge. So I appreciated that scene. For all the flaws that movie has, that's a way I would have preferred that to be handled in a war film. Thanks for listening. To hear the full version of this chat, become a Sarge or Officer tier member over on armchairhistory.tv. Use code ArmchairChats for 60% off of your first month.